person. We're thankful for those of you who are attending virtually online. As we resume our series, our book series, I am delighted to share, particularly in this MAAFA commemoration, as we are beginning this new season with a new generation of leaders of this MAAFA presentation. It's always good to hear from the elders in our midst. And I am delighted that we have such an elder on this evening. Let us pray. God, how we bless you and thank you for today. Thank you for the blessed privilege that is ours to gather both in person and virtually, that we might gain greater insight into the journeys of the men and women who have come before us, that they may instruct us through their spiritual technology then and how we might apply it today. Thank you again for our brother, Dr. Pryor, and we ask now, God, that you bless this rich conversation, that it might be edifying, equipping, so that we might continue to engage in the ministry of social service and social justice. In the name of Jesus the Christ, we thank you and we pray. Amen. I am again delighted to be here tonight, delighted to see each and every one of you, whether you are here or whether you are online. And to think about it in a moment, one of the many blessings from the ministry of marriage from Donna has been the connection of some of her lifelong friends that have journeyed with us now these 32 years. One such family friendship is that of our presenter, Brother Walter Pryor. I'm thankful that Brother Walter Pryor and Donna and Jokina King and Keith King and Juliet Pryor, they all gathered together and shared with each other at Georgetown Law School some 55 years ago. No, I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. I'm messing with you. But it was a little bit more than 30 years ago, right? They gathered together and shared a bond and a friendship that now more than 3 decades we now enjoy and share. Walter, our brother, he's become a brother of mine, not only just in the blood sense, but also now in fraternity, and we are delighted. And early this year, the Lord enabled him to birth what has been brewing in his spirit for several years, and that is the journey and the wisdom of his grandmother, the wisdom that he gained, and sometimes we don't even realize all the wisdom that's there until we pause long enough to think about it. This book, This Leaves Me Okay, is a collection of reflections from the letters that his grandmother would write him over a period of, 20-something years. Yeah, almost 30 years. And as I've read what I was able to read, Donna and I were able to read some, and she definitely has read this entire work. We just marvel that this is MAAFA. This is the story of our ancestors. And so we wanted you all to be exposed to this, to hear the reflections, the deep reflections of a woman, of an elder, of an ancestor who blessed not only her grandson, but blessed generations to come through her letters, her writing, her perspectives about race in Little Rock and really throughout the country. And so it is my honor, it is my privilege to present my brother, Walter Pryor, who will be in conversation with my partner, my soulmate, Donna Marie Logan Thompson Bennett. Come on, y'all, let's thank God as they come.
Namaste, beautiful people. This is on? Okay. I am delighted. One, because any chance I get to delve into a great book, I get excited. I am the person who loved books more than television as a young person. And then I have the honor of delving into a great book that was written by my brother, my friend. And Walter knows me well enough to know that I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe it. Meaning, if I am friendly enough with him, we have a relationship, I say, oh, no, you missed the mark with this. That is not the case. So for those of you who are here and are tuning in online, if you haven't started it yet, if you haven't had an opportunity to get it, I'm encouraging you to do so. Beautiful Karen of Kindred Thoughts Books is here this evening and can make a way for you to get the book. And if they run out, they even have a system where they'll order them for you. So don't miss out on the opportunity. This Leaves Me Okay by Walter Pryor. Walter, I want to start with our backdrop. It is the border of the book cover, and it is what is giving us an amazing background right now, one of Mama Seal's quilt. Can you share with us about this quilt and why you chose this one to be your cover backdrop?
Sure. First, let me say how delighted and honored I am. No? Now?
Yep.
Oh, yes. I want to say how delighted and honored I am to be here. I have known of Mount Airy's MAAFA experience for many, many years, and when we were first introduced, it had a huge, profound impact on me and my family. And so I have such great respect for this program, and it is very meaningful to me to be asked to be a part of it. So thank you for having me, to Pastor, Donna, entire church, and you for showing up. One of the reasons that I decided to write this book about my grandmother is that for me, she was a mythical figure. She could do all kinds of things. She cooked exceptionally well, and not just, Southern soul food, but a French souffle or anything that she could find in a recipe. She gardened, she fished, she needlepoint, she crocheted, she cross-stitched, she sewed her clothes, and she also quilted. The quilt that is behind me is a quilt that she made when our daughter was born. She wanted to do a quilt, and she asked us what we wanted, and we said, well, we don't know. All we know is we want the colors to be red, black, and green. And so she decided that this is the pattern that she would use. And so in the book, one of the chapters focuses on her quilting a fan pattern quilt similar to this, and it just seemed like an appropriate foundation for the cover of the book, since the works of her hand were very much influential on me and our family and set the stage for the book.
Thank you, and I need to just share, I want you to really take a look at this beautiful quilt. This quilt is over 32 years old because Adjoa just celebrated her 32nd birthday yesterday. And if you're wondering why I know that, is because she was born 6 days after our wedding, and these wonderful, brave, adventurous people who love us showed up from D.C. to Brooklyn as surprise guests. We had hoped they could come, but when we learned when Audra was due, we knew they wouldn't make it, but they still made it. And so Audra, I always tell her, you were at our wedding. And so I always remember how old she is based on our anniversary. Thank you for sharing, though, the story and the backdrop of that. You say, This Leaves Me Okay, Race, Legacy, and Letters from My Grandmother. So our theme this year for MAAFA is MAAFA Influence, Echoes of the Untold. And so I want to talk about some of the untold stories that you tell, particularly around race and the subtopics of race. And the first one, because often untold for us as a community of beautiful black people, we know it's there, but we don't talk about colorism. And you do. So I just wanted you to share, one, How did that influence who you are? And why was it important for you to include it in this particular piece?
Well, just to give you some context, my grandmother was born in 1915, which is just 50 years after the end of slavery. So for her, Jim Crow was very much a character, a physical presence in her life. Anybody born during that time who was black had to live with that and the knowledge of that, otherwise you wouldn't survive. And colorism happened to be one of the, I guess, byproducts of racism and Jim Crow that really came up out of just telling the story. So I wrote the book in a workshop. And the way that process works, I was in a group with 4 other writers, a workshop leader, and each week you submit 10, 15 pages, everybody reads each other's work, and then you have a discussion. Well, I had written something in the book about family members treating a light-skinned family member better than a dark-skinned family member. And a white person in the group said, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that happened. And the black people were like, oh yeah, it absolutely happens. And they're like, well, does it still happen? Yes, it absolutely still happens. As a matter of fact, darker defendants are sentenced longer than lighter defendants. There's a dearth of dark-skinned people in executive ranks that compared to light-skinned people. There are all these kinds of reflections and evidence of colorism that existed. And so as I told the story and we talked about this, someone said, oh, you should write about that. And I probably started writing it because it was a week that I had a writer's block and I couldn't get anything else. And I thought, well, I'll write about this and maybe we'll use this as a publicity piece when the book finally comes out. And a number of those reflections and essays came about of me writing about these kinds of similarities between my grandmother's life and my own life and my children's lives. And so to talk about how it influences me, I mean, any one of you could make the same comment and statement around how colorism has impacted you or your life. I mean, in this particular instance, my grandmother was darker than her cousin, who she was raised as a sister, and so she was treated differently by members of her family because, again, a byproduct of Jim Crow, slavery, racism, is that we're taught to be more like white people, and we want to emulate that. And so we value and prize people who are lighter skinned or who look more like white people. And so in terms of, I don't know if I can draw a linear line between colorism and a direct impact on me, but I mean, I was aware of it. And again, one of the things I write in the book, when I first met my wife, in split second, I processed, oh, this is going to be a good friend, because she wasn't light-skinned like all the women I had always liked and found attractive. And so at the point that we had become friends and that grew into much more, I was very aware that, wow, how is it that this is one of the first, and maybe one or two other darker-skinned girls earlier, but it was very clear to me that I had a type, and that was light-skinned, influenced by the media, influenced by colorism, influenced by Jim Crow, racism, et cetera. So a number of topics like that find their way in the book just organically, because they were part of her life, our life, continue to be part of our life, my children's lives as black people in this country.
Thank you, Walter. I'm curious, because you said your children's life, what I appreciated is you talk about this with your young people. They're now adults and they're grown. Again, I find that sometimes we hesitate and we're afraid, but I think about my mother. The joke was, at some point she confessed that my sister Lisa, who is beautiful chocolate, and actually when she was younger, to me had even more of an ebony hue, that she treated Lisa differently because she wanted Lisa to understand that she was the best thing since sliced bread, that no matter what anyone else told her or any way they treated her because she was darker, that she was not to believe the hype. And when I say you've met Lisa, you know it worked. But I remember looking at my mom and saying, but wait a minute, Lisa's brown like me and Michael and, you know, Dad. And yeah, she's a little, you know, darker than you, but Deborah's the one who's like different because my sister Deborah was light skin from one of the grandmothers, whatever. But to me, she was the oddball because she was different. And my mother said, but no, Donna, because the world would treat Deborah different. They will treat her as if she's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I didn't have to coddle her in a way that I had to get Lisa to understand that no matter what names they call you, no matter what they say or try to discriminate against you because of your beautiful black skin, I wanted her to be fortified. So that was my lesson in colorism, but it was amazing to know that my mother had the thought to say, I have to do something different. So thank you for sharing. Echoes of the Untold in terms of legacy. The book starts with your Mama Seal's experience, and it's traumatic, where there's been loss of her mom. Her dad believes probably that it's great for her to be raised by another family member where there's a couple, only for him eventually to learn she and her sister were being mistreated. Did you hear of that in any way directly from Mama Seal, or were there stories other people told you?
So a number of stories that I know about my grandmother, I did know before she died. This particular story I did not. So in terms of my grandfather, after whom I'm named, her husband, my mother's father, he drowned when my mother was a small child, so I never met him. I knew that had happened. I knew they had made the decision to send my mother to live with relatives so that she could go to a better school and hopefully go to college. I knew that. I had witnessed the challenges that decision created between them, the tension, of my mother feeling given away and my grandmother worrying that the woman she was sent to live with might be preferred by my mother. I knew all of that. But the story about this that opens the book, I learned after my grandmother had died. And I learned it from my mother, who learned it from another relative, because my grandmother had never told her. And I speculate on, in some ways, I'm not certain whether she blocked that out just for her own self-protection, or because she was just such a positive person, she decided she wasn't going to dwell on that. But we would not have known that but for this relative who told my mother. And when my mother told me, it was such an arresting scene, which I guess I'm reading a little bit. I'll read that section for you at some point so that you can hear, but it just never left my mind, this picture that was painted from this story. And it was part of the reason that I ultimately decided to write the book, because a little more background, when my grandmother died, my wife said, you really need to write a book. And she knew that over the course of my life, my grandmother had written me these letters. And of course, as a small child, I didn't have the presence of mind to save her letters. But when I was in law school, my grandmother was writing me. And instead of throwing them away, I have no idea why, but I started sticking them in my desk drawer. So by the time I graduated, I had, I don't know, maybe 3 dozen of her letters. And when you have a collection, that kind of feels like something important. You shouldn't throw it away. So my wife, Juliet, knew I had this collection of letters. We learned more about my grandmother, and she said, you should write a book. And I said, Juliet, I'm not writing a book. And partly because I just didn't see myself as doing it. I have such a great respect for great writers. And like Donna says, getting lost in a book is like one of the greatest things you can do. And I just didn't see myself doing that. But over time, Juliet would revisit the story or her urging, and I keep resisting. And finally, at some point, the weight of, I guess, the knowledge of my grandmother's life, this image that opens the book, the amazing person that my grandmother was for me. Because part of what also motivated me was my grandmother was always so outgoing and happy. You rarely see her upset or sad or depressed about anything. And I always wondered, how does somebody go through the things that she had gone through, the things that I knew and then the things that I had learned, to be the person that I knew? Because had I not known differently, I would have thought she grew up in a garden without a care in the world. There was never a problem. And so that story, that questioning, all led me to the place of writing the book.
I'm definitely going to invite you to read some of that section. and actually I think we should do it now.
Okay.
Because one of the things that we do through the MAAFA influence is we do kind of examine the untold and sometimes the told stories that are here, and we face it in terms of the trauma in order to heal from it. So I say to anyone who's listening now, who's either online but even here, if there's something that triggers, we have Pastor Paulette here as a part of the healing team. We're here for you, but I think it's important that we hear this.
So this begins chapter 1. Like many places in rural settings, what folks call the country, it's not unusual to see dogs in the fenced yards of houses along the road. Mangy and barely fed, they often look too old or tired to rouse themselves to shoo the flies buzzing around them. More often, though, the canines seem angry and determined to antagonize anyone who passes. However, in many instances, only the few true visitors to the houses know that the menacing barking, the gnarled teeth, and the desperate clawing at the fence are more show than threat. For once those planning to enter the yard actually set foot inside the gate, the dogs often all but deflate and slink off to abandoned resting spots, only occasionally bothering to even sniff the legs of the household guests. In Casco, Arkansas of 1920, these dogs became the intermittent playmates and companions for Lucille Hatch and her little sister, Dessie Mae, at the home they shared with their Uncle Jerry, Aunt Beulah, and cousins. With hair that was just this side of matted and clothes only slightly better than threadbare, the girls might have looked in worse shape than the dogs. But like those dogs, they ran wildly along the length of the fence, enclosing them when vehicles or people passed by. Where all these people came from was as much a mystery to the girls as was where they could be going. Life at their Uncle Jerry's was small and insular, extending only as far as Lucille and Dessie Mae could see beyond the road. The people in wagons and vehicles always kept going, leaving a trail of dust on the gravel road and taking with them the girls' momentary escape from their little world.
Can I go a little further?
You want me to keep reading? Oh, do you want to read?
No, it's up to you. It's that last paragraph that is so important.
Okay. Y'all gonna be living with us now, Uncle Jerry had announced the day that they arrived. This is my house, and y'all be fine as long as you do what you're told and don't show out. If y'all can't behave, y'all gonna find yourself meeting my strap, or a switch, he offered with a chuckle. A hard head make for a soft behind. Y'all understand?
Y'all understand? And so the story goes on, and that's why I want you to definitely get the book, because you learn of some of that treatment, mistreatment, but beyond just getting a switch. I remember her wanting to care for her sister and trying to get her additional food and actually getting in trouble for doing that loving care of her sister. There's good news at the end of this, but I wanted to highlight that because we come out of trauma in terms of those who descend from those who were enslaved, and sometimes the oppressive behavior has been passed on for generations. So when we talk about legacy, knowing the story, I know you and I know your story is different in terms of your children. How did you, maybe it's because Mama Seal did too, you talked about her being happy, but how did you, and even hearing about the things you were aware of before she passed, not take on some of that negative way of looking at life and addressing it? Because you just said something really profound. You said, if I didn't know, I would think life had been a garden for her in some ways. And I think people might say the same for you. And we know it hasn't always been easy. But so how did you, hearing and understanding the legacy of trauma, live your life in a different way?
I think that in many ways, I'm very fortunate that my grandmother took on the personality that she did, because had she been someone who was bitter and closed and insular, people wouldn't have blamed her. They would say, looking at her life, this woman has a right to exist in her emotions as she does. But she didn't. And I believe that that really set the foundation for our family in many ways. I think my mother's experience was also very challenging based upon the decisions that my grandmother made, but she did not pass that on to us. I think also there's an element of optimism and faith that we share just as Christians, right? We are taught and we have examples of looking beyond the present to see and anticipate what's coming, to exercise faith, right? The substance of things hoped for, evidence of things unseen. And so I believe that, I'm fortunate that I grew up in a household where faith and church was important, and I think I was able to adopt that. I think I had really great examples in my grandmother, in my parents, in the community of people who were around me. And so I don't know that I give myself a lot of credit for it so much as I feel very grateful that I had that kind of environment and those kinds of formative influence to help me get there.
And let's talk a little bit more about that, because your legacy of Mama Sil goes through your mom, beautiful Miss LaRuth. And you've talked and hinted at the decision that she made for your mother as a child. Talk a little bit more about that, and I would love to hear if you ever gained from your mom, because we hear and see a little bit through her eyes. But when it was all said and done, did she appreciate what her mom had done?
So the interesting thing about my process of writing the book, I often tried to interview my mother to get information from her. And whenever she thought she was being interviewed, she couldn't remember a thing. And I don't think she was being difficult. I just think, the pressure of it was like, oh, will I get it right? Will I know what to say? So I stopped interviewing her. And my strategy and tactic took the form of, do you remember when Mama Sil did so-and-so, so-and-so? You remember how funny that was? And she'd just start talking. Or I remember when you told me that Papa Tommy did so-and-so. Do you remember? And that way I was able to get more information from her. One of the nicest things, and I'll tie this together. I'm bouncing around a little bit, but hopefully I'll tie it together. My brother-in-law is Saul Williams. And you may know him, you may not, but if you've seen Sinners, he plays the preacher in Sinners. But when he read the book, he said to me, I want you to know, I know you wrote this about your grandmother, and it's absolutely a love letter to your grandmother, but this is also a love letter to your mother. And I hadn't realized that. That concept hadn't processed for me. And when he said that to me, it was so meaningful and touching for me, because I felt, as we talk about Echoes of the Untold, I felt in many ways my mother's story was untold. She wouldn't talk about it, and she couldn't really talk much about it because she just didn't, I guess, have the wherewithal for it. And one of the nicest things for me, when I finished the book, and my mother's not very expressive, not very emotional, and I write about that in the book too, I asked her, I said, well, what do you think when she finally finished it? Because it took her a while to finish. And I learned later that she said, I could only read it in small bits. I'd have to read a little bit and I have to put it down, because it was so emotional for her. But when she finally finished it, I said, well, what do you think? She said, it's good. She said, but what I really want to understand is how you got in my head so. Which said to me that those passages that I was recreating from what I could observe really struck true for her, and that I really did capture some of those emotions that she was feeling and some of those experiences through her eyes that I captured accurately. And so that has been one of the most rewarding experiences of this whole process, is telling not only my grandmother's story, but also the fortitude of my mother's story.
And what I thought the parallels in terms of your mom sending her away for better opportunity for education, because your grandmother, I'm sorry, sending her away for a better opportunity to live with that cousin, Elizabeth, who had been treated better because of colorism, and she didn't have her own children. And so it was an opportunity for her to have the blessing of a child in her and her husband's home. But she also had all those rules. And I've heard them before, so it wasn't like foreign to me, but I wondered how that felt to your mom who had to do the separation from her own mother into this wonderful new opportunity, but with this frigidity? And you just said she wasn't always expressive. And I'm wondering, was the influence of Elizabeth, who seemed to really try to curtail her being expressive? You know, for me, lack of a better way of saying, just being a kid. You know, the things that you think about a kid playing, running, dancing, that didn't work for Elizabeth. Yeah. But I wanted to ask, in fairness to Elizabeth, in the time period that we're talking about, what do you think was her motivation for having these rules for your mother to be a certain way at all times?
So this concept of respectability politics has long been a part of our community. And there are people who adopt the framework, I'm going to agitate, I don't care, I don't have to fit in, I'm going to force power to concede. There are also a group of people who say, if we just act right and dress right and speak right and do the right things, join the right clubs, they will accept us. And for Mama, is what I called her, who is like a grandmother for me because she raised my mom. She technically was our cousin. She was definitely of the school of, if I just train this child well, she will do well. And it's all motivated by love. That was just her perspective. And you've heard, I presume you've heard, it's better to be corrected at home than to be corrected in the streets. Yes. That was very much her philosophy. And she wanted to make sure that my mother knew how to act, how to dress, how to be respected by white people. Now, we all recognize that in many instances, it doesn't matter how clean and articulate you are. You're still a black person for some people, and your treatment will be your treatment. But the harshness for my mother was partly a function of being taken or being sent away from her parents, and then the trauma on top of it being with a relative she didn't really know very well, and then on top of it being a person who was very strict and rigid in her approach and very determined that this discipline was going to shape a very respectable Negro woman. All of that made for a very challenging environment for my mother.
And then she loses her dad and gets to go home literally for just the funeral. Did she have a legacy of her father, though, that she passed on to you in any way?
I'm not sure, because my mother only has limited memories of her father. She remembers enjoying time with him. She remembers him playing on the floor with her. But if there were aspects of my grandfather's personality that she took with us, I don't know that she ever articulated them in a way that I could connect them and say, yes, this comes from my grandfather. But it's also interesting that the only picture that I have of him, he has this very kind of earnest look about him. And it's not angry, he's not smiling, but he's not frowning. And I interpret it as this kind of determination, this kind of will in his eyes that he's gonna do something important. And I don't know that I realized that as a child. I think it's only as an adult that I've been, looking and trying to piece together aspects of his personality or his influence in my mother's life. But I do believe his presence and his spirit did carry forth, and that even if she can't articulate it, he is a part of my mother who is a part of me, and so his spirit continues to live in that way.
I want to get to the letters, but before doing that, because we've talked about your grandmother, we've talked about your mom, I want to talk about your dad, and in the, like you said, a love letter to your mom, but there's also, stories in terms of your mom and your dad. And so if there's a legacy that you feel that you gained from your dad in the union of your mom and your dad, what would it be?
So my dad was very, very old school, and he was actually about 20 years older than my mother. My mother was a second marriage for him. As a matter of fact, my dad was only 7, 8 years younger than my grandmother. So you can imagine, if you can think of Denzel Washington's character in Fences, there were parts where I was looking at the movie going, oh my gosh, this is, he's channeling my father. Because I could see, and not that, obviously that character had a lot of challenges and pathology, and I'm not saying my father was that, but there was a sense of outlook and an approach and a way that men were supposed to carry themselves. It was very much my father. And for as much as, even as a child, I could look at some of that and go, I'm not going to be that way. I'm very much that way in many ways. So I have to be very mindful and check myself of the machismo or the patriarchy or the man needs to do this, right? So I think there is that influence, and I don't mean to suggest that it's just in a bad way. I'm just saying I think that my image of what a father is supposed to do, what a husband is supposed to do, is very much influenced by my father, and I have this sense of I'm the responsible one, and I'm smiling because I just told this story this past week. Jokina King, who's my friend, her husband Keith is also a pastor, and I remember one of his early sermons. He talked about going away and a prayer that he prays to God to please take care of my family while I'm gone. And he said, and God spoke to him and said, well, who do you think takes care of your family when you're there? Right? And so I have to also be mindful of that because, my father was of that same mindset that I'm the one who's taking care. And so I do take that on in many ways and just have to be mindful of it.
The last thing around legacy before we get to the letters, because to me, it goes to the letters. The legacy around education. Mama Seal, because in the time in which she was born and therefore raised, she was only allowed an education up to 8th grade, am I correct? Yet, your mother, you, all surpassed that. What is the legacy? What was the lesson around education?
I have to say, I marvel at this concept that my grandmother had this dream, this idea that she wanted to send my mother to college. And that's because at the point that she had my mother and came up with this idea, she didn't have a model for sending a child to college. I'm not even sure if she knew, and maybe she did, black people who had graduated from college. It's possible that she did. But to decide that this was her intention, and then to make the decision to send my mother away, and just by way of background or additional context, my grandfather and grandmother didn't have my mother until they were 6 or 7 years into their marriage, which means, if you think about it, these are not people who are planning pregnancies. So either my grandmother had lost pregnancies or she had had difficulty having children. So you can imagine how happy they were when she was pregnant, they gave birth to a child, and how adored and long awaited this child was. Now imagine coming to the realization that this child that you've wanted and held on to and desired for so long, that the only way to do right by this child is to send them away. I can't imagine that decision. There was a point in which we were moving. Donna reminded me of this today. We were moving from D.C. to Chicago, and our daughter was in the 10th grade, 11th grade. And for a while, we considered, this is so unfair to her. Maybe we'll let her stay in D.C. to finish high school and stay with friends so she won't have to experience this trauma. And we ultimately couldn't do it. We just said, you know what, we're gonna figure this out, because our foursome was so close. And so when I think about my own inability to make that sacrifice with my child, I'm just amazed at what my grandmother was able to do. But when I asked my mother, And my mother, you know, has mixed feelings about being given away. And again, that's one of the issues that this decision, you know, evoked, was my mother always felt given away. But my mother will also say, had I not gone to live with this relative to this high school in the city, I probably wouldn't have gone to college. And had that been the case, then I wouldn't be sitting here today, because she wouldn't have met my father. And, you know, all these ripples that came from that decision and that effort never would have been. And so my grandmother's, even with her limited understanding of what education was and could be, she knew that was what she wanted. And one of the great joys for me is that my grandmother, when I graduated, I actually was accepted to Princeton. I was going to go to Princeton. But my father died 4 weeks after I graduated from high school. And I made the decision that I didn't feel comfortable going that far away from home. So I stayed in Arkansas and went to a small liberal arts school there. Well, the school was affiliated with the Methodist Church. The family that she worked for were big Methodists. And so they were thrilled and excited that I was going to this great school that was the Methodist Church. And so when she came to my graduation, I had been selected to be the standard bearer. So I led my class in carrying the banner of the school. You could have bought my grandmother for a penny, because she was so excited and thrilled about that. And and I'm sure she would have said, she can go home now. She can go to heaven and be fine. But then she was able to come and see me graduate from law school. She knew that my sister got her master's degree. All of this from one very courageous decision to say, I'm sending this child to go to college. I'm sending her to high school so she can go to college. She now has great-grandchildren who have graduated from Ivy League schools and international schools and doing these amazing things that she probably couldn't even imagine and probably wouldn't even understand if I tried to explain it to her. But all of that is due to the fact that she made this decision, and she had the courage and the faith and the strength and the resilience to do this. And so we are all the better for it.
One of my favorite moments in the book is when you are in this place of faith. You're praising God for something that you and Juliet were able to do, and a part of your praising God was thinking about what she would think. And it's when you were able to have that, you know, beautiful home that you purchased that others have been blessed to benefit from in Massachusetts. Can you talk about that moment? It was a Sunday morning, and it was a worship moment, but it was a worship moment that was a legacy moment, meaning it wasn't just that day.
So again, I marvel at my life in many ways. One of the things I write about in the book is Momo used to take sneakers, and she would cut panels on the sides. She would cut across the toe to make toes, and she crushed a little in the back to make like ankle straps. And she was making sandals for us out of sneakers, because we couldn't afford to buy me summer sneakers or sandals and then buy another pair in the fall. So we were not well off by any means. And I say I love television, but this idea of having a vacation home, I didn't know to dream it. I didn't know to think it. I just didn't. And so what Don is referring to, we had an opportunity. We were blessed to do well in our careers and had an opportunity to buy a home in Martha's Vineyard, and which exceeded anything I could have imagined and dreamed of. And so the day she's talking about, Don and Anthony actually were there when we closed on the house and were our first guests and first people to help us open up the house. But we were there that Sunday ourselves and had turned on gospel music. Oh Happy Day, my favorite song, was playing. And I started humming or singing along, and I'm sitting at this table looking out the window at water in the distance, and it just hits me that I'm in a vacation home with views of the water. And I'm like, how did this happen? And you know how your mind can your mind can go so fast. And in an instant, I'm thinking of my grandmother, who was a maid for most of my life. My grandmother retired from her job as a maid. Now, mind you, the last few years, she was more of a companion to the woman than she was actually doing work. But it was the same year that I graduated from law school in 1990. That's how long she served as a maid, from when my mother was a small child up until then. And my mind is trying to process this. How do we go from here to here? And I'm grateful, and I'm overwhelmed, and I don't know what to do. And so tears just start falling down my face because I can't believe that we've been able to do this. And again, this all goes back to a seminal decision to send a beloved child away to be able to go to school. All of that made everything else possible.
One of the things I wanted to begin to end with and then allow for others to have questions. You say race, legacy, and letters from my grandmother. And you described how many letters you had. I know all of them aren't in here. But one of the things I loved is that you have captured pictures of the actual letters. And then you type up, for those who don't have the Palmer method of script writing, I understood all of the script. And I loved how you didn't edit it. And to see that, and just and the letters were like, how can I say, they're diverse in terms of what she shared, but just the fact that she did this for you and your sister. So she wasn't just writing Walter, for you and your sister Jackie. And for that length of time, and I don't know if you can, but are there like a few nuggets that you take and remember from those letters that carry you through?
So let me back up to amend something you said. Not only was my grandmother writing me and my sister and my mother,
Oh, wow.
she was writing any number of people in our family. So she was writing weekly to a number of us. Juliet and I sat down, and we conservatively estimated that over the course of the time she was writing letters, she wrote me over 1,000 letters. That's just me. She was also writing my sister, she was also writing my mother, she was also writing any number of people. So I can't even fathom how many letters she wrote over the time that she decided to write letters. And, I've surmised that this was a cathartic experience for her. It was also a way to keep the family together and connected. It was a way of expressing love and what have you. But it's mind-boggling that somebody who only had a limited education decided, first of all, that she wanted to write letters. Why wasn't she intimidated? Why didn't she say, I only have an 8th grade education and my handwriting isn't good and I don't have good English, and so maybe I shouldn't do this? I don't know if it crossed her mind or not, but if it did, she got over it and decided to do it anyway. Of the letters I have, there are 14 in the book. I have about 56. And the very last letter and communications that we have from my grandmother are 2 months before she died. And they were sent just this time of year because my daughter's birthday is October 28th. And so she had sent a letter to my daughter, a birthday card, and she had written a little note, a letter, and probably something to us as well to wish her a happy birthday. One of the things that I'm most proud of, even though the letters themselves don't recall aspects of her life, and so a lot of that, the work is a memoir but also creative nonfiction. So even though I knew major events in her life, a lot of it I had to creatively come up with through experiences that I had, experiences that my mother had, and trying to craft what her life was like. But the chapter that I love most in relation to the letters, there's a chapter in which she's preparing to come to my law school graduation. And in that chapter, she almost tells her own story. I mean, I give a little introduction of what's about to come in the letter or what she's talking about. But she goes from, her first letter saying, oh, I guess I better start saving my money so I can get a bus ticket to get up there for your graduation. She had no concept that they were even going to fly. I think that was the first time she was ever on a plane. But she goes from that to saying, well, maybe I'll have enough money, but I don't have any shoes, so I might have to be barefoot. She also had a great sense of humor. She then gets to the point, all these letters getting more and more excited to where she's finally saying, well, maybe we'll have a little reception at your apartment for people when, at graduation. And she pretty much tells you her story of excitement to come. And that's what I love, because then it's really her voice speaking as opposed to mine. Yeah. But if you ask me in terms of what lessons come from her letters, I don't know that there's a singular lesson. I think, big picture, it's important to do small things for people that demonstrate thoughtfulness and love and to connect them. The act of writing a note, forget a letter. When you get a handwritten card and somebody takes the time to write something in it, you can tell that's they're pouring part of themselves into that. It's an act of love and thoughtfulness that is really meaningful and touching. And I still, to this day, try to make an effort. I don't do as well as she did, but I try to make an effort to send notes and to cards to people. Certainly if I get one, I try to respond in kind. But often I try to make time to people that wouldn't even expect to get a letter. I try to send them because I think it's so important. But her advice to me was, pretty simple, but could be very profound. She always told me, remember to be a good boy. And she continued to tell me to be a good boy well past the time that I was married and had children. Remember to pray. Remember, I love you.
Yes. Oh, I love it. And this leaves me okay comes from her letters. Am I correct?
This leaves me okay is a line that she used to write in her letters. And I was like, where did this come from? Because to me, it makes me think of, those old English people who are writing letters and I hope this finds you well. This leaves me okay. And I'm like, where did she get that from? And I still don't know. But as I was researching it, the expression "this leaves me okay" is also kind of it's an affirmation. It's a statement of intention. It's a willing yourself to be okay. And what I've surmised is that in many instances she probably wasn't okay when she was writing that, but she was willing herself to be. She probably figured that I might not be okay, or whoever she was writing might not be okay, but she was encouraging us to be. And so the weight of that sentence and the impact of it and the sermon in it is so heavy that, again, I marvel that this woman who had an 8th grade education also had such deep wit and forethought and insight and the ability to send these ripples out into the world that have impact, even to this day. I mean, I'm talking to you because of it.
I love it. I'm loving the theme of ripples. The work I do and I share with you is in family leadership and civics and democracy. And we literally have this model that's called the ripple effect because of how one person can cause so many other things to happen in a good way for others. So we're going to open it up to you, beautiful people. Are there questions? Because I have one final one, but I want to make sure you get a chance. And do I need to give up my mic? All right. Okay. Deacon Bo has the mic for you.
It may be a question or a statement. Question: how would your grandmother be today?
This would have been October 10th, would have been our 110th.
Okay. So she poured into you, poured into your mother, poured into so many others. She reminds me of the spirit of the persons like Jeremiah Wright. Because Jeremiah Wright would write and write. And he'd make you feel that you're the only one that he's writing to, but that he's writing to all because that's how he, not just pastored, but that's how he communicated. It's a lost art. Do you have anything to say about how we can recover that?
I don't. I do believe even young people like getting written notes. And I think as opposed to preaching and trying to direct them to do it, if you really want to impact somebody, just do it. Just live the sermon you want them to see. And I believe that some people will pick it up and do it. I think that, you know, the impact that it has on them will encourage them to do it. You know, my kids' generation is a generation of texting. So every now and then they'll make a point of writing a card, occasionally maybe a letter. And I hope that through this experience, they will come to appreciate the significance of it and take it up a bit more. But I honestly, I don't know what the strategy would be to get other people to do it. But I certainly encourage you to do it. And those of you here, you know, and you don't have to write weekly to everybody on the planet, but every now and then picking up a pen and writing a little card, even if it's a postcard to somebody, could have huge impact.
There's a question right there, Bo.
Thank you for sharing. And I do write letters.
Let me say this, whoever you're writing to, particularly if they're your grandchildren or people in your family, get them a keepsake box and tell them to save them. Because that's something I wish someone had told me to do even as a child. But do that, because they will be so grateful.
So I don't have children. I have nieces and nephews, but my aunt who passed away, we used to write back and forth. She was a business education teacher at my high school, so she taught me how to type, because there is a correct way and not the pecking that people do. So when you do know how to write and cursive and all of that, you don't do the pecking. And I did it with a manual typewriter.
All right, that.
Yeah, but my question is, do you think another part of your mother's aunt Elizabeth, that the responsibility of this child made her come up with all of these rules and regulations, that there was something that the responsibility was so great to her because she did not have children, that she had to maybe go a little bit deeper based on the time of society and what people were looking at?
I think that's a really astute observation, and I think it's very possible. I actually had not considered that. I did think about how determined she was to do right by my mother. And in her mind, that was not necessarily being nurturing and coddling. It was to make sure that she was equipped to go out into the world and to hopefully command respect or to engender respect from the greater society. So I do believe in her own way of demonstrating love, she was determined to provide the structure that she felt my mother needed in order to be this respectable Negro woman. And just to add to you, I want to say my mother was a business education teacher, and that's how I learned to type too. So I love that. Thank you.
That responsibility also is connected to more than just your mom, but everybody was looking, and she was on point. You know, she had an audience to see how she was going to happen to take care of this child. What was she going to do? Because if something had went awry, who was going to be blamed? Your aunt. You know,
I think
so
that's absolutely right.
There's a lot of, other parts to that, and she may have been not wanting to get too close because she knew she had to give your mama back. So there's some attachments that she did not want to make because she knew this is not my child. I'm responsible, but I do have to get it back.
I love that, and I really appreciate that, your comments. One of the things I really was trying not to do, I didn't want to paint Momo as the villain. I wanted to be truthful, but I wanted to be clear that she loved my mother and she was doing this in the best way that she knew how. I love your observation of that maybe there was even more intentionality around it, and that some of this may have been to protect both my mother and herself from future hurt. I hadn't considered that, but I love that idea.
Is there one more question yet?
One question I have is, which I'm a little surprised at, because I thought you were so special to get the letters. So now that you've shared that she wrote letters to other family members, I don't know if any of them saved the letters, or if you, now that they've read the book, if there were any consistent themes besides what stuck out for me. She always said she loved you at the end, which generationally, and it's only in my imagining. I didn't hear "I love you" often. I knew I was loved, but to say "I love you," it just strikes me in all of her letters. She actually states that.
I also appreciate that observation because I hadn't really fully thought about this, but I don't remember a lot of times her actually saying to me directly that she loved me. I'm sure she must have, because if anybody in the family would have said it, she would have been the one. Everybody else would have been a lot more reserved and what have you. But I did know that I was loved. And the interesting thing, eh, she could have written everybody in this room. I wouldn't have cared. It was still special to me, right? Because I was getting the letter. And there's a point at which I write in the book, I don't know where I got this idea that getting mail made you special. But one of the, I just believed. I got these letters and it was important and I was special and I mattered. And even if my sister got one, even if everybody on the block got one, I got mail. And so it was just an important thing. And so the letter itself was an expression of love. And you're right, she did make a point of saying, I love you. And so consciously or unconsciously, she was ensuring that that was poured into me. And so, and I benefited from it. I mean, I never questioned whether I was loved.
I think Gina had a question.
All right. Thank you, sir. My question is, how has this book resonated with your children?
My children have been just absolutely remarkable in this process. One, well, if you read the dedication, I dedicate it to my wife, who spoke this into existence, and my children, who were absolutely encouraging the entire time. And probably the best way of capturing that, when I was first finishing the book and I was trying to get people to do blurbs or to read it and help support it, to market it, I finally heard back from Stacey Abrams, who was a friend of the family, but I wasn't going to push her and ride her to do it. And she is a very disciplined, critical mind. And so she, as much as she likes us, she would not say, I think this is a good book, if she didn't think it was a good book.
That's right.
But when she got it, I don't know if I may have texted it, but then we were all together, and I was like, oh my God, Stacey says she's going to do this blurb. I'm just so excited. Or like another friend, Eric Holder. And finally my son said, Dad, you're the only one who's surprised. We all knew this was going to be great. That's the level of love and support I have for my kids in this process. So, again, I started this, maybe I'll have a few family members buy the book and a few friends who will be nice and think that it's great that I wrote a book and they'll buy it. That it seems to be doing well and resonating well beyond my circle of influence is beyond anything I could have imagined. I had one of my line brothers sent me the other day in a text message a screen capture of a TikTok where this woman said, oh, I'm walking as part of my whatever, but I'm also I'm loving reading this book. And I'm like, what? Why is he sending to me? And it's my book. And so I look, and she's, I see the cover of the book, and then she opens up to the page, and I'm trying to look closely to what page she's reading, but I'm like, so my kids, and I sent it to the family, and my daughter said, do you know this person? I was like, no, I have no idea who it is. They're like, oh my God, Dad, you're out among all these other people. So this has just been, one of those things that in my life I could not have predicted, I could not have even known to wish for, that is just, it's the kind of favor that I'm just like, thank you, God, because I didn't know to ask for it.
I just want to add to the answer. If I'm correct, I think both Osei and Adjoa have been with you when you've done a reading, like a book discussion, am I right? And Adjoa, did she moderate one of the discussions?
So we did a book event in Chicago, and the person who had originally planned to do it broke their arm, couldn't do it, and I kept saying, when are we going to talk? We're going to get together to talk about this. And they kept saying, oh, we'll do it. And they had decided they were going to have Adjoa do it. But they didn't want to tell me. And they finally ultimately had to tell me ahead of time. I was like, okay, I'm glad you told me this. Because I probably would have gotten up there and recognized it was her and just been a blubbering mess the whole time. But yes, Adjoa did moderate one of my book discussions in Chicago, and it was really a great conversation and really meaningful for both of us. Well, it was for me. I think it was for her.
I'm sure it was. I know we have to come to a close, and so I want to end in two spaces. Is there one more question? Okay, go ahead, Mrs. Council.
You have been very inspirational because I have letters from my father, and I would love to know what motivated you to just sit down and use the letters.
So, as I told you, I was very hard-headed and very resistant to this idea of writing a book. And, you know, one of the things that came out of COVID is that I had a lot of time on my hands. I was, just as COVID started, I was getting ready to end one of my corporate roles. And I hadn't figured out what the next thing I was going to do. And I just said, you know what? You know, in the back of my head, I still have this image of her running along the fence with the dogs, this idea of how does she decide to write letters, all these things, and Juliet also, you need to write the book, you need to write the book, you need to write the book. And I finally just said, you know what, I'm gonna sit down and try to write the book. And I just did. And I think it took this kind of putting away all those negative thoughts and all the insecurities and all the other stuff and just said, you know what, I'm just gonna do it. And I think it's just a matter of just saying, I'm gonna sit down today and I'm gonna write a paragraph, or I'm gonna do whatever. And that one paragraph becomes two, becomes more. And honestly, as I was writing my book, I got, you know, I may have gotten 5 pages, and then I'm like, what do I do? And that's how I ended up joining the workshop and working with people who were professional writers, it felt like, you know, and the great thing about it, not only did I get to benefit from them and my workshop leader, they treated me like a writer from the very beginning, which was also very encouraging and affirming and bolstered my ability to keep working on it. So you have letters, you have memories, we all have stories that we can tell. And even if it doesn't become a book, you can commit it to paper so that your family has it. And let me say this. One of the other things is I started to write this book, in my head, I thought I would like to encourage and inspire other people to look in their own families, because every family has at least one, maybe 2, maybe 5 people who've made seminal decisions for your family members that changed the direction that your family took. Those are the sheroes and heroes of your family that your children need to know about. They need to build upon it, and it needs to shore them up. And particularly right now, and I hope I'm not encroaching upon your question that you're about to ask, but this theme of, and we talked about this earlier, echoes of the untold. Our story should not be untold, at least not within our families. And particularly now, where there's this just outright assault on Black history and culture and legacy. You know what? We should never depend upon the federal government, the state, the schools, anybody outside of us to tell our story, to value our story, to acknowledge and celebrate our stories. And so if we've learned nothing else, and I'll consider this to be the silver lining of this craziness that we are living in right now, we need to turn inward to be more supportive of each other, to value each other, and to celebrate each other. And I believe recording our histories, whether it's in a book that goes out into the world, or whether it's just to the family member sitting next to you, or in the next state, or that's a phone call away, you need to do that and affirm it.
I am just so excited. Is there another question? Is that your hand for a question, or just a snap? Okay, cool. So the final thing, the 2 things that I wanted to say. Towards the end, and you mentioned them, you talked about your grandmother, Mama Seal, being a maid for the Horton family, if I remember right. And towards the end of the book, because of the lifelong relationship, and it seemed to be, even like you just said, even more companionship towards the end, but you had questions. You wondered, you know, was she really considered as family? If she was, why weren't certain things done? You know, something as simple as her having hot water, right, in her space. But you also say those questions really haven't been answered. And so I wondered, one, is there still any connection to the Horton family and your family? And have you gotten at peace even with the unanswered questions?
I'll take the second question first. I'm at total peace with the unanswered questions
Okay.
because I believe Mama Seal lived the life that she was meant to live. She had the impact that she was meant to have, and she's continuing to have this impact. One of the things that just completely blew my mind in this whole process, I was fortunate enough to do a book event at the Clinton Presidential Library in Little Rock where Stacey Abrams interviewed me about the book. And part of me had this out-of-body experience, and I'm standing here looking at myself, sitting on the stage with Stacey Abrams in the Clinton Library, and the people introducing me, the head of the Clinton Foundation, the head of Clinton Library, Walter Pryor, something, something, Mama Seal, blah, 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 Mama Seal. And I'm just like, none of these people knew her, and yet they're calling her name in these spaces. She could never have imagined this happening, these people calling her name, being mentioned in a presidential library. It's so improbable. I mean, just it's mind-blowing. And so that all comes from her life, her experiences. I talk about standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. In addition to standing on their shoulders and their accomplishments, we stand on their suffering. We stand on all that is part of them. And as much as I would have loved for her not to have suffered, I realize I'm only here because she did. And so I have to be grateful for that. The first part of your question was what? I got so caught up in the answer.
Are there any still connections to the Horton family?
So the connections to the Horton family, not as direct.
Okay.
I went to visit them before I finished the book. And one of the great rewards was learning that she really was part of their family. And I talk in the book about how they have all these pictures of her. And when I first saw these pictures, I got very angry because I'm like, how do you have all these pictures that I've never seen of my grandmother? These are supposed to be my pictures. Why do you have them? And, you know, God was like, hold on. These are not your pictures. These are their family pictures in their family album. And as I processed that, and I'm talking to the two, they're now 70 and 74, whatever, men that she raised as children. And as they're starting to, their voices choke as they remember her, I'm like, oh my God, this really was a genuine relationship on their part. Now, mind you, they were people of their times, and, you know, they didn't know to say, hey, can we do something more for her, or should we be doing this, or what must her life be like as a black person, and we're operating freely in our white world. But the fact of the matter is there was a relationship, and there was this familial bond for them. Certainly on the part of my grandmother, but on their part as well. And so as things happen, as I post and promote the book, they'll send me notes and say, oh, so excited for you, or so happy, or we had a conversation. They said, oh, we hope you'll consider coming up here to Northeast Arkansas and doing a book event. Here's some people that we think you can talk to, and maybe we can help you get it. So there is this connection. It's not direct and intimate, but it's still there.
Beautiful people, I'm sorry we have to come to a close. This may not leave you okay, but you can continue to read the book if you've purchased it. The author is going to be in the Northex signing, I believe, the books. Is it outside? He'll sign it here. He'll be right here signing books. And if you have yours, please come on forward. And Karen may still be in the Northex if you want to see about getting a book. Walter, thank you very, very much.
Let's thank God. Walter Pryor. Donna Thompson-Bennett. Come on, y'all, let's thank God. Before we're gonna close out. Wasn't this rich, y'all? Yes. I mean, this is rich. We are thankful for those online, a couple hundred people online in terms of viewing, and some great comments. So we didn't see questions, but that'll be for the next time. Is there a sequel, bro? There are more letters, right? There are more letters. All right. All right. Thank you all for coming. Give yourselves a hand for coming out, this intimate group. God, we thank you for the life and spirit of our brother, his grandmother, his mother, his family. Thank you, God, for this great opportunity that we can hear echoes of the untold. But our lives are so much richer because we've stilled ourselves long enough to hear those echoes. As we continue to honor and celebrate the legacy and life of these ancestors, we thank you for this next generation, this new generation that will tell the stories. We pray your spirit will cover them and the spirit of the ancestors will cover them so that they might tell these stories in courage, in faith, and yes, even in strength and humility. Thank you, God, for each person that is here, those online, and we pray as we move from this place, but never your presence, that you grant us traveling grace and mercy until we meet again. In the name of Jesus the Christ, we thank you and pray. Amen. Amen. God bless you. Go in